Within the first 30 seconds of the Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith, viewers are placed neck deep in the world of racism, and the suffering one must go through when having to choose between two different races. And as the film progresses, that suffocation only strengthens, like a rope slowly curling around your neck, choking you alive until you can't seem to breathe. The Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith does not hold back, and it is a deep dive into a world where racism pushes one to its breaking point, leading towards savagery. It is a difficult, painful watch that cuts deep, and it is not one I'll forget anytime soon. The film takes place at the turn of the century in 1900s in Australia and follows Jimmie Blacksmith, a half-white and half-Australian Aborigine who is raised by a white family, hoping to estrange him from his Aboriginal roots. He attempts his best to fit in with society, but no matter where he goes or what job he holds, racism follows him around every corner. He is dehumanized, violently assaulted, and underpaid as he tries to integrate with the whites, but that will never happen as they don't see him as part of them. He struggles to find his place in the world, and eventually, it pushes him to the brink, leading him down a path of violence. I've never watched any of director Fred Schepisi's work, but I can confidently say that he was able to transport me back in time and place me next to Jimmie Blacksmith, where I suffered the same verbal and violent abuse he was facing. I feel like I was next to him, in proximity, and can feel his pain and anger ready to ball to the surface, even though he was trying so hard to hold it back. In that aspect, I think Fred Schepisi has succeeded. What I first noticed about the Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith is how direct it is. It gets straight to the point, no beating around the bush. It needs no introduction. Within the first 5 minutes, you know this is going to be a difficult and heavy watch, and that is further reinforced with a scene right after the credits when Jimmie Blacksmith's family discuss how if he sticks around his own tribe, he would not be able to get a job, and how he should marry a white girl, so his grandchildren will only be 1/8 Australian Aborigine. While all this is happening, the camera slowly zooms out of a large dining room, until finally, the three of them are contained within the frames of the door, making it feel extremely claustrophobic, and that is what this film feels like, claustrophobic. Watching this film reminded me of Tarantino's Django Unchained. Let me just make this clear, this film is nothing like Django, where Django is all retro, flashy, cool, and gun mayhem. This film is not that, it's the opposite. This film is not meant to be entertainment, it's not meant to be fun. Instead, what it is an extremely unsettling watch. Let's first talk about the acting. I found the overall acting somewhat lacking, mostly for the side characters, but Jimmie, on the other hand, played by Tommy Lewis, did a terrific job. You watch as he tries his best to maintain his anger and prevent it from fizzling to the surface, while maintaining a forced smile and a good attitude towards those around him, hoping one day, miraculously, the whites will accept him into society. However, that wasn't how I felt when I first finished the film. That night, as I lay in bed, while I spent some time processing the film, I realized I was observing the acting from the wrong angle. When I first watched the film, I thought that Jimmie wasn't quite able to display his inner conflict and anger. I wanted to see more of his frustration and struggle. The first half displays itself with fragmented time jumps, which allows you to see Jimmie living his day-to-day life. Jimmie being placed in one job after another, while having to take in verbal abuse while staying polite and kind. And at first I found it to be jumpy and segmented, as I wasn't able to dive into Jimmie's mind and understand how he felt. I mean, why would one not display their emotions when placed under such circumstances and having to face such hatred? But then it suddenly came to me. That was what Fred Schepisi was going for all along. Schepisi's direction was able to fully draw out how Jimmie was feeling in a world that refuses to accept him in a nightmarish middle act. He wanted to present Jimmie in a way that allows viewers to see him suppressing his emotions, until it all leads to a shocking last half. If Jimmie were to display his anger or frustration within the first half of the film, the second half would not have such a deep laceration effect. All along, Schepisi's plan wasn't to allow viewers to see his anger, which is what allows the last half to be truly terrifying and intense, and I mean intense. Jimmie's anger has been brewing and has been years in the making, and it wasn't shown until halfway through the film, where finally, snap, he was pushed beyond his limit, turning him into a savage, making the shock factor that much more powerful. It was so sudden you were not given a single second to breathe. Before you have time to process what happened on screen, boom, it is over, leaving the bloody mess for you to soak up. In that aspect, I believe Schepisi was able to bring the best out of Tommy Lewis. Jimmie hiding his true anger is what makes this film so effective. After reaching the middle segment, the film begins on its grueling journey towards madness. Everything begins to move at lightning pace, adding to the shock. There's no slowing down. The editing becomes more tight and frantic when compared to the first half, where wide shots are mostly used to capture Jimmie trying to adjust to a life of hatred. Close-ups are utilized more in the last half to display a sense of claustrophobicness. As I said, once Jimmie madness kicks in, there really isn't much room for breathing. You're placed in Jimmie's shoes as you watch his madness and pain consume him, taking full control of his body and mind. It's even more depressing when you realize all along, there were moments where he was drawn back to his own roots, but he refuses to accept that, as he believes he can be accepted by the whites. He was constantly in denial. If he had accepted who he truly was, all this could have been avoided, but instead, it all led down to a path of no return, and it was a painful watch. The Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith also utilizes some great cinematography, especially when it comes to capturing the beautiful wildlife of Australia. It evokes a sense of dreaminess through gorgeous shots of the desert and lush green forests. Those shots shows us how deep down, part of Jimmie is still connected to his tribal roots. As nature has always been part of him, it is interconnected with his genes, but he was so consumed with trying to fit in that he neglected that part of his life. The dreamlike cinematography adds to the chaos in the film. Is Jimmie really going mad? Is he aware of his actions? Or is he simply being driven to the brink of insanity? Watching it doesn't feel real, as you watch a polite, kind boy suddenly shift and turn 180 degrees and go on a murderous rampage. Upon finishing the film, that dreaminess still lingers, as it is hard to believe what had just occurred on screen. Although this film does a great job of showing us how a person can be driven towards madness, I did find moments in the film where Jimmie doesn't act the way he should. There's a moment in the film when Jimmie applies to be a police officer. During part of his job, a white man has been found killed within a tribal community. This was before Jimmie went on a killing spree, by the way. Jimmie is sent there to question them, and a police officer asks Jimmie to display his superiority, and without blinking an eye, Jimmie rides around on his horse beating his own tribe with a baton. That scene felt very out of place, as I just don't see that as something Jimmie would actually do. It just doesn't seem justifiable, as the first half displayed him as a polite and kind boy. Why would he suddenly start beating up his own people? I get it, maybe he wants to show he fits in with the whites, and he's willing to go beyond what needs to be done. Still, it doesn't sit right with me, and it just feels out of place. I also did find the last 20 minutes to be a slight drag. After the murderous rampage, the film decided to include a scene where Jimmie takes a school teacher as a hostage. They decided to roam around the forest and hide from the police. I found that scene to be a tad too long, as it removes the effect of the shocking, brutal rampage that Jimmie was on. It loses its grip and power. If the film had excluded that scene and focused more on his killing spree, that last segment would have been much more powerful and impactful, as the shock factor would linger and imprint itself in viewers' mind for a much longer period. In the end, The Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith is a film I guarantee I won't forget anytime soon, as it is shocking, brutal, and depressing. It is not a film I plan to revisit in the future, as it is a painful watch and feels like a knife is being twisted in your gut. It is a deep, dark, foreboding film that dives deep into how humanity can push a person towards the brink of insanity, and in that aspect, it completely delivers. However, I did wish the film had condensed its ending slightly to make for an even more distressing delivery. This is not an easy watch, so if you decide to give it a go, just be aware. But if you decide to watch it, I guarantee it'll be a watch that you won't forget anytime soon. Have you seen The Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith? Do you plan to see it? If you did, what did you think of it? Comment below and let me know. And as always, subscribe for your next travel ticket.